The unexpected discovery: the forest was thick with mist, the kind that made the air feel heavy and the trees look like dark shadows. A small group of hunters moved quietly through the woods, their eyes sharp, scanning for movement. They had a job to do: capture the dangerous beasts that had been terrorizing the nearby village. They had tracked these creatures for days, and now they were sure they would find them. The leader of the group, Carl, was the first to spot something. His heart raced as he raised his hand to stop the others. He motioned for them to stay quiet, then slowly crouched down, peering through the underbrush. A large trap lay ahead, its spikes pointing toward the sky. It had been set in the middle of a clearing, perfect for catching the beasts they were after. But as Carl looked closer, his eyes widened in disbelief. The trap wasn't empty. Inside it, curled up and trembling, were 3 figures. They were not beasts, not at all. They were ... girls. But they were nothing like any human girls Carl had ever seen before. The girls had pale, almost white skin, and their long hair flowed down their backs like silk. Their bodies were thin, fragile, and covered in what looked like torn, ragged clothing. But the most striking thing about them were their horns, curved and sharp, rising from their heads, like a crown of twisted bone. Carl's breath caught in his throat. "What in the world ... double quotes," he whispered to himself. He stood still, unsure of what to do. These weren't the beasts they were hunting. These were something else. The girls were huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. They stared at the hunters with confusion, but their bodies shook from hunger and cold. It was clear they hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. They were starving, weak, and utterly helpless. Carl exchanged a look with his comrades, all of them equally shocked. "What do we do now?" One of the hunters, Tom, asked, his voice low. Carl didn't know how to answer. They had come here to hunt dangerous creatures, not to find this. But the girls, despite their strange appearance, didn't seem dangerous at all. They looked lost, vulnerable, and scared. Without saying another word, Carl approached the trap. Slowly, the girls didn't move, but their eyes followed him. He crouched down and spoke softly. "We're not here to hurt you." The youngest-looking girl, who had pale blue eyes that shimmered in the dim light, looked at Carl with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Her lips trembled, and Carl could see tears in her eyes. The other 2 girls, older but just as fragile, made no sound, only staring at him as if they were waiting for something. It was then that Carl noticed something else. The trap was unlike any he had seen before. It was far too elaborate for beasts. Whoever had set this trap knew what they were doing, and it was designed to capture something other than animals. His mind raced. Who were these girls? Where had they come from? And more importantly, why had they been left here, trapped and abandoned in the middle of the forest? Carl turned to the others. "We need to help them," he said, his voice firm. "These girls are in danger." "From what?" Tom asked. "They don't look dangerous." "Not from them," Carl replied, glancing back at the strange girls, "but from whatever put them here." He gestured for the others to help. The hunters moved quickly to open the trap, carefully avoiding the sharp spikes. They didn't know what kind of danger the girls had faced, but Carl couldn't stand the thought of leaving them there, alone and helpless. As the trapdoor opened, the girls didn't move. They just stared at Carl and the hunters, uncertain of what would happen next. Carl reached down to help the blue-eyed girl to her feet, careful not to hurt her. She hesitated for a moment before reaching up and grasping his hand. Her grip weak but determined. As she stood, she looked up at him. Her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else. Was it hope? Could she trust them? The other hunters helped the other two girls out of the trap. They were fragile, barely able to stand, but they managed with the hunters' support. Carl looked at the girls one last time. They were so different, so strange, yet so human in their vulnerability. They were far from the beasts he had expected to find, but they were in just as much danger. And somehow, Carl knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he could have imagined. The hunters turned back to the forest, ready to take the girls to safety, but something deep in the woods stirred. They could feel its eyes watching them, a presence waiting. It wasn't over. The real danger was still out there, and it was coming for them. The air in the forest had grown thick and heavy, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The hunters, now with the 3 alien girls in tow, moved cautiously. Through the underbrush, Carl led the way, keeping his senses sharp. He knew that something wasn't right. The feeling in his gut told him that they were not alone. The girls, although weak, had started to move with more confidence, but their eyes were still filled with fear. They had been through so much, Carl could see it. Their faces were pale, their bodies thin, and they moved like shadows, trying to stay hidden. They never spoke, but the fear in their eyes said everything. Tom, the youngest of the hunters, walked next to Carl, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Carl," he whispered, "do you think we should keep going? What if someone is following us?" Carl didn't answer right away. He too had that feeling, the feeling that something was out there, waiting. He could hear the rustling of leaves in the distance, and sometimes faint sounds of footsteps that didn't belong to them. They were being watched. "We're not stopping," Carl said quietly. "We'll find a safe place soon. Just keep moving." The girls walked silently behind them, their eyes constantly darting around. The youngest girl, the one with blue eyes, stayed close to Carl, occasionally glancing up at him with a look that seemed to say, "Will you protect us?" As they moved deeper into the forest, the trees began to close in on them. The light from the setting sun was fading fast, leaving the woods in a gloomy twilight. Every step they took seemed to echo through the silence, making it feel even more dangerous. Carl knew they couldn't keep walking through the forest for much longer. They needed shelter fast. He turned to Tom, who was keeping a lookout. "We need to find shelter before nightfall. There's a cave up ahead. We can rest there." Tom nodded, and the group quickened their pace, heading towards the cave Carl had mentioned. As they moved, the rustling noises grew louder, closer. Something was following them. Carl's instincts screamed at him to run, but he held his ground. If they were to survive this, they needed to stay calm. The cave was small, nestled against a rocky outcrop in the middle of a dense thicket. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. Carl motioned for everyone to enter. Once inside, they sat in a tight circle, the girls resting against the cold stone walls, still trembling. Carl checked the entrance, making sure they were hidden. The sounds outside the cave were growing more intense, now louder, closer. Whatever it was circling them. The blue-eyed girl, the youngest, crawled up to Carl's side. She looked up at him, her face filled with desperation. She reached out, her hands trembling, and he instinctively took her hand. She didn't speak, but her eyes spoke volumes. "Don't worry," Carl said softly, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. "We're safe here." The other two girls huddled close, their eyes scanning the entrance, trying to keep alert. The hunters tried to stay calm, but Carl could see the fear in their faces too. No one knew what was out there, but it was getting closer. Suddenly, the rustling grew louder. Then, a loud crash came from behind them, followed by the sound of something large moving through the forest. Carl's heart raced as he turned to the others. "Get ready," he whispered. Outside the cave, the air grew heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. A low growl echoed through the trees. It was deep, powerful, definitely not one of the beasts they had been hunting. This was something else, something far more dangerous. Carl looked at the girls. Their eyes were wide with fear. The girl clutched his arm tightly, her small fingers digging into his sleeve. Carl could feel her fear, and for the first time, he felt powerless. He had no idea what kind of creature could be out there, but it was clear that this was no ordinary hunt. The growls grew louder, closer. Whatever it was circling the cave. Then, without warning, a shape appeared in the shadows, a massive figure, moving with terrifying speed. Carl's heart skipped a beat as he saw the silhouette of a creature, unlike any he had seen before. The forest was alive with movement now. The creatures were everywhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And in that moment, Carl knew something terrible was coming. But what exactly, he couldn't say. Suddenly, the blue-eyed girl whispered something, her voice barely audible above the growls. "They're here," she said, her eyes wide with horror. "They've found us." Carl didn't need to ask who they were. He had a sinking feeling that they were not just being hunted by the forest's beasts. Something far worse was out there, and it was closing in on them. Secrets unveiled, the growls from outside the cave echoed through the night, sending chills down the hunters' spines. Carl stood at the entrance, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, ready for whatever might come. The rest of the hunters, including Tom, kept a tight grip on their weapons, their eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. The three alien girls huddled together in the far corner, their eyes wide with fear. The blue-eyed girl, the youngest, was trembling, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. It was clear that she was trying to stay calm, but her fear was obvious. Every so often, she would glance at Carl as if seeking reassurance, but Carl had no answers to give. The growls outside continued, and then the silence broke. A loud thud came from just outside the cave. Something large had landed on the ground. The entire cave seemed to shake, and the hairs on the back of Carl's neck stood up. The creature was close, too close. "What are we dealing with, Carl?" Tom whispered urgently, his eyes flicking between the cave entrance and the alien girls. Carl didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what was out there, but he could feel the weight of its presence. It wasn't the same kind of danger they'd faced before. It was something else entirely, something far more sinister. The blue-eyed girl suddenly moved, standing up with surprising strength despite her fragile form. She looked directly at Carl, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. Her voice, barely a whisper, reached his ears. "They are coming," she said, "but they are not the real threat. You, ... you must protect us." Carl frowned. "What do you mean? Who are they?" The girl paused, looking over her shoulder at her companions, as if unsure whether to speak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice trembling. "They, ... we are not from this world," she began. "We are refugees." hunted by a force much stronger than the beasts you seek. The ones who follow us, ... They are not beasts, they are agents of destruction. Carl listened, trying to make sense of what she was saying. His mind raced. What could be so dangerous that it made these alien girls so afraid? Before Carl could speak, the second alien girl, who had been silent until now, finally stood up. Her movements were slow and deliberate, her eyes glinting with a strange intensity. She stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "It is true," she said. "We are from a far-off planet, one that has been destroyed by a ruthless empire. The creatures that you call beasts were once peaceful, until the empire twisted them into weapons." Carl's eyes widened. "The empire?" The alien girl nodded. "Yes, they seek to control every world they find, and they use creatures like these to destroy anything in their path. They thought we would be easy to capture, but we escaped. They've been hunting us ever since." Carl stood there, trying to process what he was hearing. His mind kept racing back to the beasts they had been hunting. They were never the true threat, as the alien girl had said. The real enemy was something far worse. "And now they've come for us," the blue-eyed girl added softly. "You cannot run from them. They will find you too." Carl's heart raced. The situation was growing more dangerous by the second. The hunters had come here to deal with monsters, but now they were facing something far beyond their understanding. "We need to get out of here," Carl said urgently. "We can't stay here any longer. We need to warn the others." But before he could give any further orders, the growls outside grew louder. The ground trembled with each step of whatever creature was outside. It was moving closer, almost as if it knew they were inside the cave. Carl turned back to the alien girls. "What can we do? How can we fight this?" The second girl spoke again, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "You can't fight them with weapons. Their power is beyond your comprehension. But there is one thing you can do." "What is it?" Carl asked, desperate. The girl took a deep breath, then looked at Carl and the others with solemn eyes. "You must trust us. We know the way to stop them. But we need your help. We need to get to the ship." "Ship?" Tom asked. "You have a ship? How do we even know if we can trust you?" The girl's gaze softened, but the urgency in her voice remained. "We have no choice. If you don't help us, the Empire will destroy everything. You will not be able to stop them on your own." Carl exchanged a look with Tom. He knew the situation was dire. They had come here to hunt beasts, but now they were in the middle of something far bigger than they ever imagined. As the growls outside grew louder, closer, Carl made up his mind. "All right, we'll help, but you need to explain more. We can't just follow you blindly." The blue-eyed girl nodded slowly, then whispered, "We will, but time is running out." The hunters, now with the alien girls as their only hope, braced themselves. They were about to step into a fight that could change everything, but for now they could only move forward, not knowing what awaited them in the shadows of the forest. The pursuit of the air outside the cave was thick with tension. The growls had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press down on everything. Carl could feel his heart racing, the fear of the unknown creeping into his bones. Whatever was out there, it was close, and it was getting closer. The alien girls huddled together in the far corner of the cave, their eyes wide with fear. The blue-eyed girl, who had spoken earlier, clutched Carl's arm tightly, her fingers cold and trembling. She seemed to sense the danger that was closing in on them, just as Carl did. We need to move, Carl said, his voice low and steady. We can't stay here much longer. The second alien girl, the one who had spoken of the Empire, stood up slowly. We don't have much time, she said. They've found us. The Empire's agents are near. We must go. Carl turned to the others. Get your weapons ready. Stay close, and don't make a sound. The hunters nodded, their faces grim. They had come here expecting to hunt beasts, but now they were facing something far more dangerous. These alien girls, fragile and frightened as they were, held the key to their survival. But Carl wasn't sure if that would be enough. Outside, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the forest. The creatures, the beasts, were moving closer. But it was more than that. Carl could sense something else, something worse. The growls weren't coming from the creatures alone. There were other sounds, more human in nature, and they were getting closer. Do you hear that? Tom whispered, his eyes wide with fear. It's not just the beasts. Carl nodded. He heard it too. A faint rhythmic sound like marching, coming from deeper in the forest. The Empire's agents were close. They were hunting the girls, and they would stop at nothing to find them. We need to move, now, Carl urged. Head for the edge of the forest. We'll take a detour. We'll stave off the main path. The hunters and the girls quickly gathered their things and made their way toward the cave's entrance. But before they could step out, the blue-eyed girl stopped, suddenly, her hand gripping Carl's arm once more. Wait, she whispered, her voice filled with fear. They're here. Carl didn't hesitate. He motioned for the others to crouch low and stay quiet. The hunters and the girls pressed against the cave walls, trying to make themselves as small as possible. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Closer, it wasn't just one or two creatures. It was a whole group, and they were moving fast. Carl's pulse quickened. They were running out of time. The blue-eyed girl glanced up at Carl, her expression serious. The Empire's agents won't stop until they have us. But if we can reach the ship, we can escape. Carl nodded. Then let's move. With the girls in the lead, the group slipped out of the cave and into the forest, moving as quietly as possible. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows that made every movement feel like a potential mistake. The hunters kept their eyes peeled for any signs of danger, while the alien girls led the way, their senses sharper than the humans in the darkness as they moved. Carl could hear the sounds of the creatures growing louder, but they hadn't been spotted yet. The Empire's agents, whatever they were still close. He could feel it in the air, a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. They were being hunted. The forest was dense, the path winding and narrow, but the group moved quickly, using the trees for cover. They knew they couldn't afford to be seen. Every step they took had to be calculated, precise. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center, hidden from view, was a large, metallic structure, half covered by the underbrush. It looked like a ship, but not one like Carl had ever seen before. It was sleek, its surface gleaming even in the dim light of the forest, and it hummed softly, almost as if alive. The blue-eyed girl turned to Carl, her face filled with both hope and fear. "We're almost there," she said, her voice shaky. "But we're not safe yet." Carl nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He could feel that something was wrong. The ship was too quiet, too still. It didn't make sense. "Get inside," Carl ordered, his voice urgent. Now, the hunters and the alien girls rushed toward the ship, but just as they were about to enter, a loud crash came from behind them. The sound of something massive crashing through the trees filled the air, and Carl spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The beasts were here, but they weren't the only danger. From the shadows of the trees, figures emerged, tall, dark shapes moving swiftly, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. These weren't the creatures they had been hunting. These were the Empire's agents. Move. Carl shouted, pushing the girls toward the ship. Get inside, now. The hunters and the alien girls rushed inside, but just as Carl was about to follow, a figure stepped forward, blocking the entrance. It was one of the Empire's agents, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Its voice, cold and commanding, echoed through the clearing. Nowhere to run, hunters. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Carl's heart sank. The real fight was just beginning. The reveal the air inside the ship was colder than the forest, and the low hum of its machinery made the silence feel even heavier. The hunters and the alien girls had barely made it inside when the doors slammed shut behind them. Carl's heart was still racing from the chase, and he could feel his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The ship was sleek and metallic, but it felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. The blue-eyed girl had collapsed onto the floor, exhausted and shaking, while the other two girls tried to comfort her. The hunters, their weapons still drawn, stood, guard eyes darting to every corner of the ship. The air inside was thin, and it had a strange, almost sterile scent to it. Carl couldn't help but feel uneasy. This wasn't a normal ship. It was too advanced, too alien. It felt wrong somehow, as if it was hiding something important. One of the alien girls, the older one with darker skin and bright green eyes, stood up from where she had been kneeling beside the blue-eyed girl. Her voice was low but firm as she addressed Carl. We don't have much time. They'll follow us, but the ship can't hold them off for long. We need to tell you everything about who we are and why we are running. Carl looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and curiosity. What do you mean? Who are you really? The alien girl's eyes flickered to the blue-eyed girl who was still sitting on the floor, her face pale and drawn. She took a deep breath before she spoke again. We're not just refugees, she began. We are from a planet called Nixon. Our world was destroyed by the Empire, the same Empire that is hunting us. They didn't just destroy our home, they wiped out our entire race. The creatures you call beasts were once part of our planet, but the Empire twisted them. They made them into weapons. Carl listened in shock. His mind couldn't fully comprehend what he was hearing. He had thought these girls were just lost, starving aliens, but now they were telling him something much more terrifying. The Empire was responsible for destroying their home. And the beasts weren't just monsters, they were victims too. The Empire used the creatures to hunt down any survivors. The girl continued, and they came after us next. We escaped, but they've been following us across the galaxy. Carl's head was spinning. You said we could stop them. How? The alien girl's eyes hardened, a look of quiet determination crossing her face. The ship we're in is our last hope. It has technology far beyond what your people can understand. It was built to fight the Empire's forces. But it needs one thing to activate, to connect with someone who has the power to control it. Carl frowned. What does that mean? The blue-eyed girl stood up slowly, her face grim. It means that the ship can only be activated by one of us, by me. Her voice was filled with both fear and resolve. I'm the last of my kind. The Empire destroyed my people, and I am the only one left who can stop them. Carl felt a chill run down his spine. The girl, the blue-eyed one, was more than just a refugee. She was the key to stopping the Empire and saving everything. But why had she waited so long to tell him this? "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Tom asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why keep us in the dark?" The blue-eyed girl's gaze softened. "I didn't want to put you in danger. I wasn't sure if you would believe me or if you would even want to help. But now I have no choice. The Empire is close, and they will stop at nothing to destroy us all. If I don't activate the ship, they will find us, and we will all die." Carl took a deep breath. This was too big, too overwhelming. But they had no choice. The Empire was coming, and the girls were their only hope of survival. "We'll help you," Carl said, his voice steady. "But how do we activate the ship?" The blue-eyed girl nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "The ship has a control room. It's deep inside, and I need to reach it. But I can't do it alone. I need you to keep the Empire's agents away long enough for me to connect with the ship's core." Carl's heart raced. They were running out of time. He glanced at the other hunters, who nodded in agreement. There was no turning back now. If they didn't help these alien girls, they would all die. The Empire would make sure of that. "Let's move," Carl said, his voice firm. "We'll protect you." The blue-eyed girl looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. They had no idea what awaited them inside the ship, or how they were going to stop the Empire. But for the first time since they had found the alien girls, Carl felt a spark of hope. They might have a chance if they could get to the control room in time, but the danger was far from over. The Empire's agents were still out there, and they were closing in. The real fight was about to begin. The hum of the ship grew louder as the group made their way through the narrow, metallic corridors. The blue-eyed girl led the way, her steps steady, but there was a look of deep concentration on her face. Carl and the other hunters followed closely behind, their eyes constantly scanning for danger. The Empire's agents were out there, and they could strike at any moment. The ship, though advanced, felt like a maze. The walls were smooth, the floor cold beneath their boots. There was a sense of urgency in the air as they moved through the ship's winding passageways, every step echoing in the silence. "We're almost there," the blue-eyed girl said, her voice soft but determined. She glanced over her shoulder at Carl. "But we need to hurry. The agents are already searching for us. If they reach the ship's core before I do, we'll never have a chance." Carl nodded, his mind racing. He knew they didn't have much time. He had seen the look in her eyes, the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She was their only hope, and they were all depending on her to stop the Empire. As they reached a large circular door at the end of the hall, the blue-eyed girl stopped. She placed her hand on the door's control panel, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was the control room. It was far more advanced than anything Carl had ever seen. Sleek metallic surfaces covered the walls, with glowing symbols and panels that Carl couldn't even begin to understand. "This is it," the blue-eyed girl said, turning to face them. "I need to connect with the core, but while I do, you'll need to keep the agents away from the room. We don't have much time before they find us." Carl stepped forward, his eyes determined. "We'll keep them back. Just do what you need to do." The blue-eyed girl nodded and stepped into the control room. The door shut behind her with a soft thud, and Carl turned to the rest of the group. "Get ready. They'll be here any second." The hunters and the alien girls quickly spread out, taking defensive positions near the control room. The air was thick with tension as they waited. They could hear the distant sounds of footsteps and the low growls of the beasts that had been following them. But this time, it wasn't just the beasts they had to worry about. The Empire's agents were closing in, and they were stronger than anything the hunters had ever faced. "They're here," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. Carl's hand gripped the hilt of his weapon tightly. He could feel the presence of the agents growing closer. They were almost upon them. "Stay calm," he said, his voice low but firm. "We've trained for moments like this. We can do this." The sound of footsteps grew louder, and then, suddenly, the door at the end of the hall burst open. 3 figures stepped into the room, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were tall, their faces cold and emotionless, and their movements were precise, almost mechanical. These were the Empire's agents. "We've found you," one of them said, its voice cold and commanding. Carl didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired. The blast hit one of the agents square in the chest, but it barely slowed him down. The agent seemed unfazed, as if the shot had done nothing at all. "They're not normal," Carl muttered. "They're too strong." The other agents advanced, moving swiftly toward the hunters and the alien girls. Carl and Tom fired again, but the agents dodged their shots with ease, closing the distance between them. "Get to the control room," Carl shouted to the girls. "Stay behind us." The blue-eyed girl was inside the room, her hands glowing with a soft, ethereal light. As she connected with the ship's core, she was focused, determined, but Carl could see the strain on her face. She was using every ounce of her energy to connect with the ship, and it was clear that it was taking a toll on her. The agents were now within striking distance. Carl and Tom were ready to fight to the end, but they knew they couldn't take on these agents alone. The Empire had made these beings far stronger than anything they had ever faced before. It was as if they were up against machines designed to hunt and destroy suddenly. The blue-eyed girl's voice rang out from the control room, her words echoing through the ship. "I've connected with the core. The ship is ready, but I need a few more moments to power it up." Carl felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the agent's attack. The first agent lunged at Carl, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Carl barely had time to react before the agent was upon him, its hand gripping his throat. It was strong, too strong. Tom stepped in, firing his weapon at the agent, but the shot missed, and the agent turned on him. The second agent was now attacking. Tom and Carl knew they couldn't hold out much longer. Just a few more seconds. The blue-eyed girl cried out from the control room. Her voice was strained, desperate. Carl knew they had to hold out. They had to buy her the time she needed. But the agents were relentless. The fight was brutal, and the hunters were losing ground fast. Just as Carl was about to be overpowered, the ship's lights suddenly flared to life. A deafening sound filled the air, and the ship's core glowed brighter than ever before. The agents froze, their eyes flickering as if they were malfunctioning. The ship's power was surging, and the agents seemed to be struggling against it. "We did it," the blue-eyed girl shouted from the control room. "The ship's core is activated. Now we can stop them." The agents staggered back, disoriented. They were no longer as powerful as before. The blue-eyed girl had activated the ship's defenses, and the agents were now vulnerable. Carl stood up, breathing heavily, and signaled to the others, "Now's our chance. Let's finish this." With the power of the ship on their side, the hunters and the alien girls rushed forward, ready to fight back against the Empire's agents. They weren't out of danger yet, but for the first time, they had a fighting chance. A new beginning. The sounds of battle echoed through the ship as the agents staggered back, disoriented by the sudden surge of energy from the ship's core. The glow of the ship's lights grew brighter, casting long shadows on the walls. The hunters, now feeling the shift in power, moved quickly to take advantage of the moment. Carl, his weapon still in hand, rushed toward the nearest agent. The creature was reeling from the blast of energy, its movements slower and more erratic than before. Carl didn't hesitate. He lunged, pushing the agent against the wall, pinning it there. The agent struggled, its glowing eyes flashing wildly. But it was no match for the combined strength of Carl and Tom. "Keep moving." Carl shouted to Tom, "We need to clear the rest." Tom nodded, taking cover and firing at the other agents, his aim now more precise. With the ship's energy coursing through their surroundings, the agents seemed less invincible. Their glowing eyes flickered, and their movements became sluggish. In the control room, the blue-eyed girl stood at the ship's core, her hands raised as she focused all her energy on activating the final defenses. The ship hummed louder than before, a deep, almost resonant sound that filled the entire vessel. "We're almost there," she cried out, her voice filled with hope and determination. "The ship can now protect us from them, but we need to hurry." As Carl fought to keep the agents away from the control room, he felt a strange mix of fear and relief. They had come so far, but they were still in danger. The Empire's agents were relentless, and even with the ship's power, they couldn't let their guard down. Just then, one of the agents regained its composure and lunged toward the control room. Its movements were quicker now, its glowing eyes fixed on the blue-eyed girl. "No," Carl shouted. He saw the danger in an instant and made a split-second decision. Without thinking, he charged toward the agent, throwing himself in its path. The agent grabbed him by the throat, its grip like iron, but Carl fought with everything he had. He reached for his weapon and fired, the blast hitting the agent in the chest. The agent staggered back, stunned. "Get away from her," Carl growled, pushing the agent off of him with all his strength. The agent collapsed to the floor, its movements becoming weaker and more erratic. In the control room, the blue-eyed girl finally completed the activation. The ship's core glowed brightly, the energy it had been holding back now fully unleashed. The ship's defensive shields powered up, enveloping the vessel in a protective field. "We did it," she cried, her voice filled with relief. "The shields are up. We're safe." Carl stood up, his body bruised and sore, but he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The battle wasn't over, but they had won this round. The Empire's agents were no longer a threat. As the last agent collapsed, defeated by the ship's power, Carl turned to the alien girls. They were exhausted, but their eyes held a new sense of hope. They had been through so much, but now they had a chance at survival. "We can't stay here forever," Carl said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to figure out our next move. The Empire will send more agents." The blue-eyed girl nodded. "We know, but for now we have a moment. A chance to regroup, to breathe." Carl looked around at the hunters, who were catching their breath, checking their weapons, and ensuring the ship was secure. They had come a long way from the simple hunters they once were. Now they were part of something much bigger, something that could change the fate of many worlds. "We've been through a lot," Carl said, his voice quiet but strong. "But we've made it this far, and we'll keep going, together." The blue-eyed girl smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you. You saved us. You gave us hope. And now we will help you." For the first time, Carl felt like they might actually have a chance. The ship, the girls, the battle they had just won it, all seemed like the beginning of something much larger. They had defeated the Empire's agents for now, but the fight wasn't over. The Empire was still out there, and they were still hunting them. But now, with the ship's power and the bond they had formed, they had hope, and hope, Carl knew, was the greatest weapon of all.